Nobody's going to take me seriously as an ogre anymore. Yeah. Well, I was joking that I was. I'm not actually going to. I mean, I could. I mean, don't you want a good challenge?
It wasn't a challenge. Every single page It was the honest first exam I've ever taken.
Okay, well, I feel better then. All right.
I would definitely agree with that.
Yeah.
Like, have you ever taken like OChem or anything?
No, I'm a theater major.
I mean, there's that. It's really hard.
It doesn't matter if it's spelled genius, but it's one hard.
OChem 2 without studying was the hardest one that I did, having to intuit my way through my OChem 2 final. Without taking OChem 1. It was kind of hard.
Kind of hard.
Okay. Yeah, I don't recommend that.
What did you get on the test?
I think 24.
Out of?
24%. After the curve. I had to take the class again. And I went. I never took OChem 1, but I did actually show up for class for OChem 2 to do the weekend. It helps. You'd think that you would just know, chemistry, and how hard can it be? Okay, so where were we? All right, I wanted to use all the rest of my little bit of cards, so I did. So we have Leontes discovers that Hermione's intention cannot be empirically verified. We remember this, right? So it kind of dawns on him that there's no way to know the Othello moment. And then from there, he decides that you can't have faith in sensory certainty at all, and it's kind of a psychotic break, as we saw a little bit, right? But he's kind of right too, right? You have a question? Okay. So we get this metaphysical doubt thing, and I feel like that if I'm gonna test this on the Descartes and the Kant stuff, that I should go over it again. Or do you feel like totally cool with it? No, you're not totally cool with it. Okay. Well, that's the feedback I wanted, because otherwise I'm just gonna have to do jumping jacks and break out one of my raps from the early '90s.
Oh my god, if you rap for us, please.
No, you know what? I did that to a film class once. I told them that if everybody got better than a B on the exam, I would have to rap in front of them, and damn it, they did it. So I'm never making that. I'm never making that up. You think it's like riding a bicycle? It's not. You can't just take 15 years off and get right back to it. So anyway, we have Leontes. We're talking Descartes here, man. This is I think some, but not. So we got this metaphysical doubt, and if you can't judge by your senses, because your senses deceive you, you hallucinate, you are just wrong sometimes. What else are examples that we can't trust our senses? Misinterpretation, hallucination. Forgetfulness. Well, is that senses, or is that our fault?
Memory.
Yeah.
Just color minus like your eyes.
Yeah. So there's just, and how do I know that like your green is my green? Like we could be living in completely different. There's no way to tell. Yes, sir.
Mirages.
Mirages. There you go. Good one. Yeah. The sleep deprivation. I told you about my clear and lucid memory of driving through a big hamster tube into Portland. I was driving from Tucson to Portland without I stopped for gas, but without rest. And I have a clear and distinct memory of driving through a giant hamster tube. So Descartes, so Descartes like, well, I can't be certain of anything, but Descartes could be certain of one thing. Remember?
That he exists.
Yeah, but you should know this because it comes up in the educated people. It's, I'll probably spell it wrong. So ergo means therefore, right? This is the I think. So it's the short form. People just say and they're talking about the self because self sounds kind of huggy and therapeutic-y. They like to say cogito or cogito, or I don't think there's really since Latin's a dead language, I don't think anybody will yell at you for pronouncing it wrong. And then some is I am, right? Sort of, not really, but I mean that's how we'll translate it. I think, therefore I am. So and that sort of makes sense, right? I mean, you've got to be something if you're thinking, right? Does anyone want to say no?
What was the question?
So what are you more certain of? Yourself or the external world?
Probably myself.
Yeah, I mean, you could be wired up in the matrix thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
But you'd still be you, right? Okay. So you can be certain of yourself existing, but you can't know that anything else exists unless, and this is unfair to Descartes because I love Descartes, I really do, and I think that he's great. And I'm sick of everybody being mean to him, calling him stupid because of this substance dualism thing. But nobody who ever reads Descartes actually thinks he's stupid. I mean, philosophers are always wrong. That's what makes them fun. But anywho, but basically, his argument, and this is actually a lot of philosophy textbooks actually use this as the textbook example of a circular argument for the existence of God, and this is, I mean, and this is not doing Descartes any justice, but basically kind of the popular conception of it is, since I can conceive of God, then God must exist. And God is by definition benevolent, so he would not create a world that is fundamentally deceptive because God by nature is beneficent. So I can trust my apprehensions because so it goes in a circle, right? So do I need to draw the circle? Okay. Yes. Okay. So we have me thinks God, and then God's existence. I can't spell guarantees. Anyone know how to spell guarantees?
R-A-M.
I'm going to put suggests.
There you go. Done that on my final.
So I exist, therefore God exists, therefore I exist, therefore God exists. And the reason that I like Descartes is because it's like a comedy, right? He grounds his reality on what is ultimately an irrational, that is, not philosophical, outside of the system belief. So it's kind of just like saying, it's kind of like a floor smell saying, we're just going to sail, man, something will happen. And it's hip that like he's easily top 5 all-time smartest people, and he gets away with it.
What would he say if he said that you can conceive of the idea also that there is no God? And submit.
Yeah, this has actually been suggested.
Oh.
It's not a. This has not been the idea that has sustained Descartes through in the high esteem of philosophers ever since. But interestingly, the thing he's made fun of even more than this is, so you've got mind and body on the old mind-body problem, and he suggested that to connect the mind-body problem was the function of the pineal gland in the brain, and but the interesting thing is since the pineal gland controls so many hormones and stuff. And the model of consciousness that's coming out is that we're basically just affects that get interpreted after the fact. It actually might be the place where mind and body communicate, because the communication between mind and body is interpretation of hormonal effects in the brain, right? So he might have been right, and that's the thing he gets made fun of the most. If that happens, I will be so happy because I'm a big believer in lost causes like Descartes. It'll all come around. Yeah, Plato, Hegel, Descartes, everybody makes fun of. I love them. But anywho, so, okay, where am I? This kind of thinking, that is, grounding your certainty that reality exists on something that you have no verifiable empirical evidence of, like God, is called pure reason. Why is it pure reason? Because there's no empirical evidence. Because you can't empirically prove the existence of God, right? It's got to be through a rational argument. Or mystical testimony. That is infamously difficult to falsify or replicate. Right? Okay. So it doesn't mean that God doesn't exist or that he does. It means that it's not an empirical matter. So just from the perspective of philosophy. So Immanuel Kant, or Kant as I like to call him, in his Critique of Pure Reason, critiques pure reason, and dismisses this kind of thinking as dogmatism. And thank you for the person who laughed. So this shift the discussion from I have from ontology to epistemology. Does anyone know what ontology is? We should know this.
Trying to prove the existence of God.
Or thing. So ontology is about being, existence, like real stuff, like what's really there. And then there's epistemology, which I don't know how to spell. Epistemology. I'm crippled by spell check. I would be considered illiterate if I was born outside of the. But it's a brief window that you had to spell right. It's basically just from Dr. Johnson's dictionary until the advent of spell check. Because before that, like read Milton, read Shakespeare. They spell the same word 6 different ways in one word. I'm very, very. But epistemology. Sorry. Anybody know what epistemology is? Yeah.
That's just the study of knowledge.
Yeah. Study of how we know or think or whatever. Study of knowledge is probably a better way to. And then the other major branch of philosophy, just so you get your branches of philosophy down.
Distributive justice.
Ethics. And that's
What I know.
yeah. Or what ought I to do? I like. What ought I to do? So, usually the only people all right, I don't want to make, philosophy was my first love, well, my second love, well, my third love. Then I came back to her and fought. So, but what Kant does, we saw with the transcendental schema, he shifts he's like, this is, there's no reason to even bother with this because you can't know it. It's we're too limited. So he kind of makes ontology epistemology. And so instead of what is being, it's how do we know stuff. So for Kant, you never know reality, but you can build up a working model with clear and distinct ideas through the transcendental, schematic, and categories. So transcendental, this is good. So it's a philosophical opposition between transcendent and transcendental. And you should know this because this is cool to know. So transcendent means that you need to evoke something from outside of the system in order to ground your system. Like Descartes is a transcendent system because he needs to bring in something outside of the system, God, to make his system work. Transcendental is actually the opposite. It doesn't. It's immanent. It means that you don't have to. All you have is the schema, or the schemata, because there's actually various things going on in it, and then you just dismiss the other thing, so it's not transcendent. So this is good to know at a party because a lot of times people at parties start talking about like transcendent man, and they get transcendental and transcendent mixed up. And if you guys are both competing to the same mate, and somebody gets this confused and you shut them down, they will look stupid and you will look good and you will probably score. Well, no. But you'll be less unlikely to score if you're not wrong about your discussion of transcendent and transcendental. It's the last day. This could be a really dry conversation if I don't digress. So Kant's thing gives us good news and bad news. The good news is you don't need any outside guarantee of existence like God, so you don't need any irrational belief, so you don't need to believe in comedy, so you don't have to be stupid. But the bad news is you do have to believe in yourself, your access to reason, understanding, and judgment. This means that you have to believe, because we saw about the Kantian sublime, ultimately you have to believe in your power of imagination. And that's, in order to believe in the objective validity of the transcendental scheme, you have to believe that you're not crazy, right? Because if you're crazy and there's no God to guarantee that you're not being deceived, you're deceiving yourself, and then reality flies out the window, which is not good, right? Has anyone ever seen reality fly out the window? It just happened to me. Okay, so Leontes, skips Descartes and goes straight to Kant. And the age before DNA tests, which incidentally, so they're like 99.8% accurate, right? Which sounds really good, right? But if you think about it, so if everybody on the planet, 7 billion people on the planet, if everybody gets DNA tested, how many are going to be wrong? Math whizzes out there? Like how many 1 in a million chances happen every day in a population of 7 billion? Yeah, crap ton. All right, well, I don't want to show off by screwing up the intuitive math. So there's no DNA test, so you can't be sure of Mamelius's paternity any more than he can be certain of Hermione's intention. And the two, of course, are closely related. So the point that he's at is not going completely, and I actually have the word batshit written on the card, insane, requires the kind of irrational belief in Hermione that Descartes needs in God. All right, you with me?
It's 2 million, by the way.
Thank you. Yeah, because I couldn't remember the percentage point I said. I didn't know if I said 9 or 9, because I think it's actually 9.8. And I didn't know if I quoted the wrong statistic or not. Most of my statistics are plus or minus 3 or 4 percentage points. I knew that I needed to stop doing it because my daughter went around quoting bullshit statistics. I was just like, oh no, I'm that guy. But anyway, so the place that Leontes is at is he figures out that kind of his whole world is dependent on his belief in what he calls Hermione's intention, which is her desire or what she's really up to, which is completely unknowable, right? And probably even to herself, because there's I kind of have an opening for the big Chivers thing that I've been trying not to do all semester. Think I should take it?
Yes.
So Meredith Chivers, who's a eminent specialist in the neurophysiology of female desire, and she ran an interesting test, and this is one of the fun things, how male brains and female brains, and this doesn't get confused if you're a gay male or a gay female. It still works pretty much the same way. So they get the groups and they show them well, first they hook them up to a fun piece of machinery. I won't get too graphic. That determines your bodily sexual arousal, and then you also have to write, like you've got to do a subjective little check mark saying I was aroused, this aroused me, they didn't. So the pictures were a guy working out, a girl working out, a heterosexual couple having sex, gay males having sex, lesbian sex, and bonobo sex. So,
What?
the bonobo sex?
Yeah.
Oh, it's a control, right? So it's okay. So men.
Truth will be disappointing moment.
Men. I don't think it'll be disappointing. This is the only thing that's ever made sense to me. So men have what they interpreted as a alarmingly high correspondence between what they reported aroused them and what they didn't, and what they said didn't. So like if the guy said, like I really liked the guy working out, and then there's a 66% correlation, or rate .66, but I'll say 66% correlation between what the guy says turned him on and what really turned him on. Now with the women, it was a different story. So they're you're looking at the low 30s here, which is pretty much chance, because guess what turned the women on physically? Everything. So what this tells us is that women's experience of desire is culturally or personally or idiosyncratically mediated. You're sort of divorced from your bodies, and there's probably a lot of good evolutionary reasons for this. But it is fine. But what it means is that if you feel like sometimes you're having a hard time interpreting your desires, it's probably because you are. And men, 66 isn't that. I mean, you're still 34% off. I mean, to me, that would be, I don't know. All right, well, that's the thing that I hadn't talked about. So anyway, but this is what Leontes is dealing with, and he doesn't even have access to the thought process. So he's twice removed from reality. He's like somebody looking at. So there's Hermione's transcendental schema, which is all screwed up. But that's the thing in itself for Leontes, so he's sort of twice removed. So he's got a transcendental schema of something that doesn't exist. Sound familiar, guys? But in order for him to ground his reality, he just has to have faith in Hermione, because you can't be sure of it, right? So it's just, and I mean, I think this is relationships, right? At some point, if you really think about it, and go ahead and try. Anyone that's happily in a relationship, just really start thinking about it, and really start thinking about all of the things as, that guy is a biological being, or that girl is a biological being. And, look around and just think, you're a biological being, think about what they're thinking. Really analyze it. Spend a lot of time dwelling on it. Start asking questions. Probe. Keep poking. Be accusatory. And good things will happen, right? So no, what you got to do, the best thing to do is just sort of, you don't want to get totally screwed over, so you've kind of got to pay attention, if there's an actual line of actual strippers outside of the house waiting to see your boyfriend, maybe you should be suspicious. But if not, just be happy, man, screw it, whatever. He's thinking about other people, like your girlfriend's thinking about something else while you're doing it, so what? Get over it. Don't think about it. Just have a rational belief, or you'll end up like Leontes. I just want something, The point is that you can, the overall theme of this class is you can study philosophy, behavioral economics, evolutionary psychology, psychoanalysis, everything that we've studied, or you can just read Shakespeare. So actually, Shakespeare isn't really that hard, right? Because you get everything from it anyway, and it's better than having to specialize in every discipline on demand. Shakespeare. But Leontes' doubt will not allow him to have this sort of the kind of stupidity that keeps relationships alive, right? So like Kant, Leontes has to ground his certainty on something internal. Shakespeare, who understands humans far too well to allow them any Kantian illusion of an objective internal transcendental schema, goes straight to imagination. So he doesn't bother with the reason, the judgment, the understanding, which is so reason, mathematics, loosely with ontology, understanding, kind of social sciences, epistemology, and then and ethics, and then aesthetics, which is the other branch of philosophy, aesthetics. Sorry, aesthetics. You're always getting free. Now, aesthetics are the study of the beautiful, right, and the sublime. All right. Sublime and beautiful were actually opposed terms up until the 20th century. sublime meant terrifying, and the opposite of beautiful, and beautiful meant beautiful. So you didn't want to be like a sublime woman. That would be like, what's her name with the hair? Medusa.
The hair.
You know, with the hair chick. So in Kant, you can ground reason on imagination, right? And we saw how. And for someone like, say, remember King from Midsummer Night's Dream? Theseus, yeah. So Theseus, he was not a Kantian, right? So think of his speech at the beginning of Act 5, where they just got the levers reeled in, and they just told him about what had happened, and he actually opposes the seething brains and shaping fantasies of the imagination to the comprehension of what he calls cool reason. And he was talking about what three people? Yeah. What was that again? So I heard poets. Lovers. What was the other one? Closets? Lunatics. Yeah, lunatics. So the lover, the lunatic, and the poet. And then, so Leontes is all three, right? So anyway, what Theseus says, as I quote from memory. And as imagination bodies forth the form of things unknown, the poet's pen turns them to shapes and gives to airy nothing a local habitation and a name. Such tricks hath strong imagination, that if it would but apprehend some joy, it comprehends some bringer of that joy. Or in the night, imagining some fear, how easy is a bush supposed a bear. All right, so we'll just I'll slow it down a little bit. So, and we talked about this before, so it'll be a kind of a recall exercise. So what so you've got these things unknown that come in, and into the seething brains, and the poet and the lunatic and the lover turns them to shapes. So it's sort of what Kant's doing, right? And gives to airy nothing a local habitation and a name. So you name the thing and put it in a place in what we would call your cognitive map, right? And then that it would but apprehend some joy. It comprehends some bringer of that joy. So you feel a good feeling, and then you look around for the reason that you have the good feeling. Another a similar study to what we were just talking about was some graduate students did this. And there was an old rickety bridge near campus, and they dressed up one of their female graduate students, and had her go out on the middle of the bridge with a little survey form and ask guys to rate how attractive she was. This would be a great job. Okay. Ah. And then they did for a control, the same clothes, same chick, woman, and not on a rickety bridge, just in a nice, safe place. So guess where she was far more attractive? Yeah, because they're anxious, their blood rate's a little bit up, and so you interpret that as being aroused. So you think that, oh, she's arousing. So so you get the feeling comes first, and then the reason for I'm having an elevated pulse rate, and this is all unconscious. I must be attracted to you. Oh yeah, you're totally a 10, dude.
How do you know it just wasn't hasty and you just wanted to get it done with, so they just said, oh yeah.
Yeah, wouldn't it be the same thing though? What's the motivation?
To get off the fruit.
So you tell somebody I've told many people that they're beautiful to get them off my back. I think you might have a legitimate objection here, but they've done different contexts that I think would. I can't believe I've come to the point where my long-standing enemy of cognitive psychology is I'm defending it. It's been happening a lot lately. So Theseus, like Kant, sees a relationship between imagination and reason. Unlike Kant, he thinks that relationship is a little bit of a problem. So what he calls first, let's say, you can't make me start bringing erasers too. Matter of time. Okay, so and we're using Theseus's language here. So what comes first is what he calls apprehension, which is basically an emotion, or we'd say affect in affective neuroscience, but emotion will work fine. His examples are joy and fear, but we could add jealousy, doubt, insecurity, exuberance. Any other emotions? Nervousness, awkwardness, getting hit with a shoeedness. Then, actually it's like this. So here's world, and we have to put it in quotation marks now because who knows what that is. So you get an apprehension of something, then what he calls comprehension. Which is, as he puts it, it gives shapes, habitations, and names to the airy nothings of pure apprehensions. And so our relationship with the world is emotion-driven, at least as often as not, and the origin of our affects, emotions, is at least partially from the external world. And so take Theseus's bush and a bear example, which is fortunately an example that the evolutionary psychologists use all the time. So you are alone walking through the wilderness at night. Picture it. Has anyone ever done this? Okay. So let's step out of philosophical la-la land for a minute and think scientifically, or at least evolutionarily, biologically. Yeah. So if we're products of natural selection, we do things that would contribute to survival and reproduction, even if it makes us look stupid, right? Because the thing that you need to do as a product of evolution is to survive to reproduction age and then reproduce as much as humanly possible. And then try and get those up to reproductive age too, so your genes will survive. So what natural state or emotion would be advantageous to a person walking through bear country at night?
Fear.
Yeah, so if I'm happy and lighthearted, it's like, and then there's a rustle in a bush, right? Or right? So who wins this race? A bush rustles. Yeah, so we're like, it's nothing, dude. Or like you scream, and so you're walking together. You've got one nervous friend and one cool dude. Who's going to get eaten? This is probably the accounts for the survival of nerds in the evolutionary environment. So statistically speaking, it is probably not a bear, right? There's far more rustling bushes than bears, right? But which reaction still confers an advantage? Because like an advantage has to be a very small advantage. Like over the course of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of years. Every little edge gives you a big edge. So you could two ways instead of the lighthearted. You could be like, "You fool! It is highly unlikely that it's a bear," or "Scream and run, thinking bear." So sometimes it really is a bear. And then so what strategy leads to the production of more kids and less being eaten? Yeah. So if we just reacted coolly and rationally to things like this, we would be at a disadvantage to people that sort of flew off the handle. Right?
What about if you repeatedly did this and repeatedly looked stupid, that would also hurt your chances of reproducing?
Yeah, because if somebody saw you, yeah.
And also, the stress shortens your life expectancy, doesn't it? So if you're constantly stressed
Well, get constantly stressed out, but it's got to be appropriate environments. We're using the bush and a bear example at night, but the thing is just having dispositions to being attuned dispositionally to certain scenarios and having the tendency to have that, creating a long-term. So you could be too scared and full of cortisol and die when you're 9, or freak out and run off a cliff when you think you hear a bear. So it's not completely. Obviously it's a mediation. Who was first? All right.
But even if your life expectancy is hypothetically 70 years, it takes off 20 years of your life. That's sort of the end of your reproductive cycle anyway. So you produce.
If you're a woman, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, postmenopause in women is evolutionary blank. I mean, there's no, you can't explain the behavior of postmenopausal women with evolutionary psychology. Try that they might.
I thought it was to raise grandchildren.
That's what they're saying, right? All right, sure. Okay, why not? I like those kind of. I study literature. I like just those stories. But okay. So as it turns out, imagination actually is a more reliable survival mechanism than cool reason. And we should expect natural selection would encourage our brains to react to the external world in this way. So the good news is that it makes us less likely to get eaten by bears. Tell that to the guy that got eaten by a bear. That's what's great about this example, is in the back of our mind is exit pursued by bear. The bad news is that we're flaming irrational morons. What are you going to do? So reason or comprehension is what they call a confabulation, a post hoc confabulation that we use to explain our irrational actions to ourselves and to others. So we remember the split brain patient example, right? And about how our explanation for things, we'll make stuff up even when we have no idea why we did it. Does anyone not remember the split brain thing? Okay. So anyway, so you irrationally run away from a bush and scare all your friends and you say, "Dude, there was a bear in that bush." I swear it. So in the same bush bear logic works with jealousy. We think we talked about this too, but if anything, I'm not averse to repeating myself. Your ancestors, biological at least, were not allowing or ignorant husbands who, with or without their consent, raised some other dude's spawn. So being a little too jealous, and way too jealous, gets us to the problem of running from too many bushes and scaring away prospective mates. But error on the side of jealousy would scare off, would be more likely to scare off competition and keep your woman in line, right? Otherwise, we wouldn't be so jealous. And because not jealous enough lets too much slide. So the point is that we're not that we are hardwired to be irrational hotheads that fly off the handle at any opportunity, and insofar as we directly interact with the world, we directly interact with the world through emotional and affective systems. With me? Okay. So this means that our reason and understanding can never apply directly to reality, and we can never be certain of an out there. So Leontes' problem to impose certainty on reality is doomed from the start. It's impossible. You can't do it. We're not even wired that way. It's not something that humans can do. Maybe we can make a computer that can do it. We can't do it. We can only be certain of our apprehensions, and our apprehensions are wrong a lot, right? And the apprehensions are the emotional responses. And we can't be certain that they're rational, since our brains just make up the most plausible or palpable, as Brabantio would say, explanations. So you run from the bush, you're not going to say there was a squirrel in that bush afterwards. Well, you would dramatically decrease your likelihood of reproducing if you. So the thing we associate with reason, that is what Antonio Damasio calls our autobiographical self, the one with the story, with interests and opinions and goals and likes and dislikes and hopes and dreams and experiences and traumas, is twice removed from reality. So its job has nothing to do with being right. Well, I won't say nothing to do. It's not primarily. Its primary job is not to be right. It's to produce, the feeling of meaning that gives your life a story and can explain the reasons that you do what you do, and that sort of thing, right? And but it only needs to be right enough to get you laid, basically, right? So again, Leontes is overtaxing his system. So like our precious little identities are not really the thing that our interaction with reality is supposed to sustain. And of course, like all things, this brings us back to the colostomy principle. So the reward system that drives the autobiographical self, the comprehending self, runs off of palpability. It'll cause unbearable anxiety and distress, cognitive dissonance, until it can make a palpable story out of an uncertain situation. So we're thinking Leontes in this uncertain situation. We're thinking Othello, and so it's not that the system is averse to happy endings, but it'll take tragedy over uncertainty any day. Which brings us to the text. 45 minutes late. Let's go to page 25. All right. So Leontes just got confirmation that that Camillo just ran off with Polly, and so he reads this as confirmation that what?
Guilty.
Yeah. So he's been sleeping. He's been sleeping with the wife. One, possibly both kids are not his. They were plotting to kill him and usurp him from the kingdom, and basically his whole life is just completely fallen apart. And how does he react? His first 4 words on line 37. How blessed am I in my just censure, in my true opinion. Okay. So, but this doesn't surprise us at all at this point, right? Of course. He's just like Othello. We keep seeing this again and again. And a lack for lesser knowledge, how accursed in being so blessed. So now he's doing this nice little emo moment of, I just know too much, man. Makes it painful. So just because depressed people are right more often doesn't mean that they're right overall. And then there may be in a cup a spider steep, one may drink, depart, yet partake no venom. For his knowledge is not infected, but if one present to the above ingredient makes known he has drunk, he cracks his gorge, his sides, his violent hath I have drunk, and unseen the spider. Okay. We've already talked about this. But the how blessed am I only works, in finding proof that your wife and BFF are plotting to kill and replace you, only works with the joy of, predicting apocalypse, which is the colostomy principle writ large. And, our stock example is the crazy fundamentalist that's been saying that the end of the world's coming, watching the end of the world come, and actually having mixed feelings about it because the world's ending. But at least I was right? The world's ending! Yes! I was crap. So, not only right about this, but being right is possible, is the reason that he's so happy, right? Certainty can be achieved, if only by the magical thinking and omnipotence of thought that his spider fantasy says. So if it was a tragedy, it would just end here. What's the only problem with this position? It's been a running joke of the Winter's Tale lecture. It's wrong. So Antigonus points the way out at the end of the scene, which is on page 30, when he says, all right, so Leontes is announcing to Antigonus and the Lord that he's going to go publicly proclaim his charges against his wife and Polly. He says, come, follow us. We are to speak in public, for this business will raise us all. And Antigonus says, to laughter, as I take it, if the good truth were known. So again, we have this opposition of tragic certainty and comic contingency. So the only way that this doesn't become a tragedy is because of his blind spots, and thankfully they are many. Let's go to page 40. This is where Leontes initiates the comedy. I'm on 171. We enjoin thee, as thou art liegeman to us, that thou carry this female bastard hence, and that thou bear it to some remote and desert place, quite out of our dominions, and that there thou leave it, without more mercy, to its own protection in favor of the climate. and by strange fortune it came to us, I do in justice charge thee, on thy soul's peril and thy body's torture, that thou commend it strangely to some place where chance may nurse or end it. And that's the origin of the Bohemia comedy, right? He gives it to chance. And we know with stupid believing in comedy that that's all it takes. And then, so let's, sorry we have to go fast. We've got a lot to, I don't think that we're going to be able to watch the movie. All right. So, and we remember what snapped, as Cavell pointed out, what snaps Leontes out of his craziness. Yeah, his kid dies, but theatrically, as Cavell would say, it's right after Hermione goes, right? There is something about a girl fainting that kind of snaps you out of it and makes you feel really rational. Or a guy fainting, for that matter. So, so recap, gets the oracle's prediction, denies the oracle's prediction, then immediately gets the news of the son's death, and Hermione faints, and then all of a sudden he snaps out of it. I have too much believed my own suspicion. Apollo, pardon my great profaneness against thine oracle. I'll reconcile me to blah, 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 blah. So he either just completely becomes rational and instantaneously analyzes everything that's happened between his supposed psychotic breaker now, or he actually knew what was going on all along and was just sort of playing pretend. So because this speech is very coherent, complete change of tune, takes accountability. Who's he addressing after everyone leaves? Apollo, right? So so he kind of re-enters the realm of belief, right? So he's no longer a good Kantian, he's now a Cartesian. And he's the better for it. Because what's really going on is Apollo's apparent, sorry Cavell, but Apollo's apparent punishment showed him that he didn't have to worry about certainty. He was just, he was just hysterical and needed Daddy to come in and tell him what happened, and that's what Apollo did. So he's a hysterical belief. Does that make sense? All right, I see no no's. So now, and then of course Leontes now really seems to enjoy being wrong and accepts Paulina's verbal lashings almost eagerly. And as we've learned, he says, go on, thou canst not speak too much. I have deserved all tongues to talk their bitterest. So, and we talked about this, about how guilty feelings are assuaged by punishment. So if you're guilty, the punishment actually produces pleasure. Yeah, here's another example, but we don't have enough time. And his last wish is to verify the deaths of his wife and child, so he gets colostomy closure and can spend his time lamenting, certain in the knowledge, it's paradox alert, certain in the knowledge that he was wrong. So should be happy, right? But so this could be the end, right? This is exactly the kind of tragic ending. This is what I really wanted all along. So this is right. So we know that if we made Leontes' desire, what he really wants is to be wrong and punished, and not have to deal with the wife and kid. But he did leave something to chance, and his guarantee of certainty, that is Apollo's vengeance. I guess you could say, you could make an argument that Apollo really exists and the oracle really told the truth as the oracle, but that's not really Shakespeare's MO, right? So, so if his big comfort is from that Apollo really exists and he punishes wrongdoings, then his certainty is wrong, right? His belief is wrong. It's ultimately stupid. He's wrong. There's no such thing as Apollo. Sorry, pagans. So what is the divine order of this play? So Leo gives his daughter to chance, and what saves her, and what kills Mamilius, and what kills Antigonus, and chance, right? I mean, really? Like, do you think that thinking that your dad thinks that your mom is a whore can actually biologically terminate your existence? What's the evolutionary advantage of this? No. Your immune system, I mean, you could say, all right, your immune system is affected by the stress hormones. But, I mean, ultimately, the time of his death, he did not have some quantum connection to the charges being, and he didn't just instantly die when Leontes blasphemed, right? Or are we going, all right, you can write the argument. I'm not going to believe you, but I'll give you an A if it's a good paper. So the question becomes, who or what can make chance a good thing? And who or what must Leontes and everyone else ultimately believe in? Because it can't just be just chance, right? Because chance will get you killed, chance will get you eaten by a bear, chance will do all kinds of things that aren't necessarily good. Well, right. I mean, that's why you can't just be trusting, right? Well, this is the problem of Bohemian. Unlike in Cecilia, where tragic certainty is the vice of choice, the vice here is that people are too credulous. They have too much comic belief, but maybe that's okay. So, if we look at the beginning of the Bohemia scene, I think we're at 58. Yeah. So there's time. The reason that time has to explain what happened is because of the dramatic unities, and pseudo-Aristotelian critics at the time insisted on the unities of time, space, and action. That like perfectly, a perfect play would be that all the action takes place in a place the size of the stage, in the actual time that the stage happens, so you can't have flashbacks or next day or 2 days later or 16 years later, and the action can't be broken. And Shakespeare is just sort of completely flying in the face of the dramatic unities here, but he throws them a bone and has time come and explain that they're a bunch of pedantic arseholes. All right. So, but the initial setup. So for the problem of the second part of the play, underneath it all, is it Florimel and Perdita, or is it Polixenes and Camillo? And Polixenes and Camillo are talking about Camillo wants to go home to satisfy his woman's longing, and Polixenes says that it's sickness and death to grant this. Well, sickness to deny you, and death to grant it. So shut up and no, because he doesn't want to be sick or dead. So and then we see a bunch of kind of credulous, happy-go-lucky dumbasses get manipulated in Bohemia, and Florimel and Perdita being the biggest dupes, right? Because Camillo uses them to get his ticket back to Leontes, and I don't think that he has any evidence whatsoever that they would do anything but just get completely hosed by their participation in this program. All right. So, yeah, I said I covered that. Kind of a treatise on chaos theory is a contingency management strategy. That seems worth saying. The whole series of chances moves the comic plot, unlike the single stubborn denial that moves the tragic plot. So, so we remember Leontes gave Perdita the chance. Antigonus dies, so we're looking at the chain of chances here. So that was the first chance. Antigonus dies, so no possibility of retrieving the child, because he's killed by a chance encounter with the bear, who by chance wasn't hungry, and that's why they really make a big think about it. If they're hungry, they don't eat. So it really makes it, like the bear was not an evil agent planning; he was just a hungry bear. And by chance, Perdita was raised by a rich shepherd, so she didn't ruin herself by actually having to work. And a chance encounter with Florimel, et cetera, right? That's what moves the whole plot along. So, and Bohemians deal with all of this existential uncertainty. How? Having little Leontian crises everywhere. How do I know that you're my... No. Now they just have this stupid, groundless, credulous optimism. They trust. Florimel is especially stupid. He trusts chance. Camillo You trust Chance and Camillo, and seems to take the mock court. And so they're doing the mock court thing at the shearing festival. And if you didn't catch this, and Perdita is the queen of the ceremonies. And so Florimel sort of acts as if he's taking it seriously, and she really is a queen. And you can't, if you're a prince, you can't marry a freaking shepherd's daughter. This is not that, right? But he just sort of thinks it's going to turn out okay, and because he's really taking the whole Lord of Misrule thing seriously. So shepherd, clowns, Dorcas. I just had to say Dorcas because it's a fabulous name. Are similarly stupid. How do we know? Yeah, so in a neighborhood where no one is suspicious or thinks to lock their doors, who can do really well? Yeah. So in Bohemia, we have this predator and prey relationship, knaves and fools, and it's brought to the forefront. So instead of existential doubt, we have essential, indiscriminate belief and the people who profit from it. So the figure par excellence, of course, is Autolycus, right? I just love Autolycus. All right. Page 87. Ha, what a fool honesty is. And trust his sworn brother, a very simple gentleman. So he sold all of his trumpery. My clown who wants but something to be a reasonable man grew so in love with the wench's song that he would not stir his petitos till he had both tune and words. And then, so in that time of lethargy, I picked and cut most of their festival purses. So they're just all happy, having a good time, and he completely fleeces them at the sheep fleecing ceremony, right? And so how come I don't hate Autolycus? He just robbed everybody and lied to them. And does anybody hate Autolycus? Now, an interesting thing is for some is confidence men, as they're known now. A term that originated in America in the 1800s, describing a guy who was arrested for the crime of going and befriending people and being really friendly to them and saying, there's not enough confidence, there's not enough trust in this world. Give me your watch and I'll meet you here tomorrow and I'll give you your watch back, just to show confidence, because society's falling apart, everybody's strangers, and so he was just making a killing doing this. Until he got arrested and they called him the confidence man.
Well, how is that illegal though, just because people are gullible?
I mean, it's a fine line, right? Does anybody think that guy should be hung? No, because you do?
Yeah.
Okay, we got one. Right.
It's the same thing
I
as
think you might be right, but
it's the same thing as killing him. It's a con.
yeah. So but I think the reason that almost all of us are like, what are you going to do? This is why like armed robbery and confidence games, you get mad if you're the one that's conned, but most of us have a tendency, if we're not the one getting conned, we kind of think that, you were an idiot. You don't send your bank account number to a Nigerian prince. And the thing is that the confidence game, the reason that it works is that trusting people feels good, as it turns out, and it's the oxytocin thing, right? And so if you give people oxytocin, it makes them happier, it makes them more trusting, and it makes them more gullible, but it still feels good, like even being gullible until, of course, you find out that but they don't put that part in. But, so confidence man and Autolycus, in a way, is kind of providing a legitimate service. It's just a really expensive oxytocin shot. Think of it that way. You don't have to kill him. Just give him an oxytocin. You wouldn't give your watch to somebody, would you? Okay, because if you said yes, I was going to... I need a watch. You guys see this piece of crap I wear? All right. That's what they say. The two things that women look at you and judge you about are or three: your watch, your shoes, and your butt. I don't think they're right. Yeah, their eternal wisdom. So but Autolycus is not the only predator feasting on the Bohemian fools, right? No, he's not. Who else? Camilla, we talked about. And how about this jackass Polynixes? Go to page 78. Now, if Autolycus is among my favorite Shakespearean characters, Polynixes. So he's in hiding right now, right? And talking to the shepherd. He's simple and tells much, he says aside to Camillo. So taking, like Autolycus, taking example of his simpleness and his tells much, his compulsion to trust. And then he says, "Sooth, when I was young and handed love as you do, I was wont to load my she with knacks. I would have ransacked the peddler's silken treasury." So this means that that what he's okay with is if his son is just going to go and have a ransack the silken treasury of Perdita and then just leave it, because that's what he would have done, right? What a frickin' guy. So that doesn't make him mad. What makes him mad is when Florizel demonstrates sound affection, what Camillo says. And then that's when we need to put a stop to this nonsense, right? And then he's like, "I'll have thy beauty scratched with briars and made more homely than thy state." So this is going to be his punishment to her because it's her fault, who didn't even know that he was a prince. He's going to scratch her face all up so she's ugly. I think Leontes was right to think this guy's a jackass. All right, sorry. Yeah, well, I'll take Leontes' existential jackassedness over just. I have a feeling Leontes never did anything like that. He was probably
He's a nice guy.
trying to decide. Yeah, I mean, he's the dad, and Polly's the cad. We've got Florizel's Fool's Manifesto on page 83. "I am, and by my fancy, if my reason will therefore be obedient, I have reason." I am, and by my fancy, if my reason will therefore be obedient, I have reason. I'm going to do what I'm going to do, and if reason says go along, then I have reason. If not, my sense is better pleased with madness. Do bid it welcome. Well said. Next page. "Do you have any plans? Not any yet, but as the end thought on accident is guilty to what we wildly do, so we profess ourselves to be the slaves of chance and fly of every wind that blows." Yeah, good job. So you've got these two, you got pros and cons of stupidity and doubt, right? So it's I don't have enough time. So both of them are kind of bad though, right? So all right, we're going high speed now. The truth of literature, if not reality, is that the biggest doubters, misers, etc., are potentially the biggest dupes. Why? Because people that are really not trusting, they're the ones that get totally suckered, right? Because the one person that takes the time to give them their oxytocin thing, they're so deprived that it's like frickin' crack. And so the misers and people that I will never ever, another man will never ever do that to me. And then sure enough, 2 years later, they just get completely hosed in the most obvious, stupid way that you possibly imagined, right? And so we get Leontes and Paulina, right? The ultimate doubter becomes the ultimate dupe. So Paulina, as the ultimate con man, gets Leo to swear to leave the future of his kingdom, his heir production, entirely up to her. This is basically, this is much worse than sending the proverbial disposed Nigerian prince your bank account number. And in fact, I would argue that at this point, on page 98, Leo is more nuts than ever. "Thou speakest truth, no more such wives, therefore no wife, when worse and better used, would make her sainted spirit against possessor corpse. And on this stage where offenders now appear soul vexed and begin, why to me? Had she such power, she had just cause. She had, and would incense me to murder her I married. I should so." So this is their responsibility. If I get married, her zombie will come up and drive me to kill my new wife. And Paulina's like, "Damn Skippy," and she should. So, and then we have Leontes' last flicker of personal agency on page 104, which is, of course, when he contemplates making a pass at his daughter. And then his excuse is, I was thinking of, she just really looks like Hermione. I was thinking of her. Yeah, try that excuse. It's the Amy Winehouse excuse. But I thought about you while I was having sex with him. Philosophical problem. So a description of Perdita's identity discovery, famously narrated off stage. Why? Screw it. Not that important. Theme of the narration is, and the theme of the narration is, this is important, is that it's all about how what they're telling can't be narrated. I make a broken delivery of this business. There is speech in their dumbness. Blah, 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 blah. Ballad makers cannot express it. That you have lost sight of what was to be seen cannot be spoken of. I have never heard of such another encounter, and Lame's reports to follow it. So it's just a big story about how I can't describe everything that I'm describing. So, and then Autolycus was the first one to figure out what happened. Is it really important?
No.
Okay. Autolycus was the first one to figure out what happened, but nobody believed him because he actually wasn't enough of a con man. So you can't just tell the truth like this. No one will believe you. To convince someone of something novel or improbable or counterintuitive, like your wife's actually been alive the whole time, you must first produce the intended anticipatory affect emotion. Remember how our brains work. And that is, Shakespeare seems to imply, you need theatrical production. To convey this kind of wonder, as he calls it, which in turn produces the feeling of certainty that our doubting but credulous affect-driven brains, you need theater, presentation. Presentation, not representation of the thing. Which ironically you can only get through elaborate staging of magic in order to create the feelings that you need, the feelings that will be aroused, that you will be able to connect to the thing that appears, and then it will make sense to you, and then you can believe and have certainty, even though you've been completely duped, and it was a magic act, and part of you kind of knows that, but it's the only way that your brain can make sense of it, right? So when you look at which we ought to do, but we can't. If you look at what Paulina does, that's what she does. She starts making this whole. And if you're a magic psychic con person, this is what you do. Right? You have to have faith. Now think, concentrate very hard, and then so you start getting this woo thing. It's just like, look how lifelike the statue is. See how it almost moves. Now I'm going to do some magic now. Now if any of you think that this is witchcraft and are going to freak out, you want to step away now because some stuff's about to happen. You're like. So you get this feeling of wonder and magic, and then the wife comes alive, and even though it was just this story that's going to be really awkward dinner discussion later about how I was hiding in the house for 16 years because you're a crazy bastard, it just comes to this magical moment, and then he's able to register it and doesn't freak out, and everybody's happy, and the play ends. And this is the role of the theater, and this is why Cavell says, because Cavell says, well, this is exactly what church does. You go into a church and they make all this, all this to do and gives you the feeling of awe and you connect it to God. And this is why Cavell says that theater is actually trying to replace the church in its production of awe and creating certainty through theatrical effects. Any last questions? Yeah.
Yeah, earlier in this myth, he said there was something that you would tell us on the last day of class. I don't remember what it was.
Let's pretend it was the Chivers thing. Because I have. I got to give you your quizzes back. You'll need them to study. Nobody's going to take me seriously as an ogre anymore. Yeah.
Does that mean you're going to make the final harder?
Well, I was joking that I was. I'm not actually going to. I mean, I could. I mean, don't you want a good challenge?
It wasn't every single page It was the honest, hardest exam I've ever taken.
Okay, well, I feel better then. All right.
I would definitely agree with that.
Yeah.
Like, have you ever taken like OChem or anything?
No, I'm a theater major.
Yeah.
I mean, there's that. Like, it's really hard.
It doesn't matter if it's spelled genius, but it's one hard.
OChem 2 without studying was the hardest one that I did, having to intuit my way through my OChem 2 final. Without taking OChem 1. It was kind of hard.
Kind of hard.
Okay. Yeah, I don't recommend that.
What'd you get on the test?
I think 24.
Out of?
24%. After the curve. I had to take the class again. And I went. I never took OChem 1, but I did actually show up for class for OChem 2 to do it. It helps. Because it comes up in the educated people. It's, I'll probably spell it wrong. So, ergo means therefore, right? This is the I think, so it's the short form. People just say and they're talking about the self because self sounds kind of huggy and therapeutic-y. They like to say cogito or cogito, or I don't think there's really a, since Latin's a dead language, I don't think anybody will yell at you for pronouncing it wrong. And then some is I am, right? Sort of, not really, but I mean that's how we'll translate it. I think, therefore I am. So, and that sort of makes sense, right? I mean, you've got to be something if you're thinking, right? Does anyone want to say no?
What was the question?
So what are you more certain of? Yourself or the external world?
Probably myself.
Yeah, I mean, you could be wired up in the matrix thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
But you'd still be you, right? Sort of. Okay. So you can be certain of yourself existing, but you can't know that anything else exists unless, and this is unfair to Descartes because I love Descartes, I really do, and I think that he's great. And I'm sick of everybody being mean to him, calling him stupid because of this substance dualism thing. But nobody who ever reads Descartes actually thinks he's stupid. I mean, philosophers are always wrong. That's what makes them fun. But anywho, but basically, his argument, and this is actually a lot of philosophy textbooks actually use this as the textbook example of a circular argument for the existence of God, and this is, I mean, and this is not doing Descartes any justice, but basically kind of the popular conception of it is, since I can conceive of God, then God must exist. And God is by definition benevolent, so he would not create a world that is fundamentally deceptive, because God by nature is beneficent. So so I can trust my apprehensions, because so it goes in a circle, right? So do I need to draw the circle? Okay. Yes. Okay. So we have me thinks God, and then God's existence. I can't spell guarantees. Anyone know how to spell
It's
guarantees?
like Goulet-Ron.
R-A-M. I'm going to put suggests.
There you go. Done that on my finals.
So I exist, therefore God exists, therefore I exist, therefore God exists. So and the reason that I like Descartes is because it's like a comedy, right? He grounds his. You'd think that you would just know, chemistry. How hard can it be? Okay, so where were we? All right, I wanted to use all the rest of my little cards, so I did. So we have Leontes discovers that Hermione's intention cannot be empirically verified. We remember this, right? So it kind of dawns on him that there's no way to know. The Othello moment. And then from there, he decides that you can't have faith in sensory certainty at all, and it's kind of a psychotic break, as we saw a little bit, right? But he's kind of right too, right? You have a question? Okay. So we get this metaphysical doubt thing, and I feel like that if I'm gonna test this on the Descartes and the Kant stuff, that I should go over it again. Or do you feel like totally cool with it? No, you're not totally cool with it. Okay. Well, that's the feedback I wanted, because otherwise I'm just gonna have to do jumping jacks and break out one of my raps from the early '90s.
Oh my god, if you rap for us, please.
No, you know what? I did that to a film class once. I told them that if everybody got better than a B on the exam, I would have to rap in front of them. And damn it, they did it. So I'm never making that. I'm never making that up. You think it's like riding a bicycle. It's not. You can't just take 15 years off and get right back to it. So anyway, we have Leontes. We're talking Descartes here, man. This is I think somebody not. So we got this metaphysical doubt, and if you can't judge by your senses, because your senses deceive you, you hallucinate, you are just wrong sometimes. What else are examples that we can't trust our senses? Misinterpretation, hallucination, forgetfulness. Well, is that senses or is that our fault?
Memory.
Yeah.
Just color blindness, like your eyes.
Yeah, so there's just, and how do I know that like your green is my green? You know, like we could be living in completely different, you know, I mean, there's no way to tell. Yes, sir?
Mirages.
Mirages, there you go, good one. Yeah, the sleep deprivation. I told you about my clear and lucid memory of driving through a big hamster tube into Portland. I was driving from Tucson to Portland without I stopped for gas, but without rest. And I have a clear and distinct memory of driving through a giant hamster tube. So Descartes, so Descartes like, well, I can't be certain of anything, but Descartes could be certain of one thing. Remember?
That he exists.
Yeah, you should know this.